Cool. Hi all. Thank you for joining the session. Thanks to Dave and Daniela for doing this. Uh, Special thanks to Dave as well for first to set the context. Right, as I said, uh, last year during our Canada summit in November, we had a session on Dora Report, right, where you presented some of the findings of what Dora Report is in 2021 after the pandemic and all those things, and little bit going to the history of Dora Report, where Google. This is kind of the first of the kind of report from Google after taking over Dora, right? One of the things that we felt was, we wanted our community members to understand what goes behind this report, right? The report comes out from different organizations, Dora being the primary in Devops, without a doubt, and people absorb it, the industry absorbs it, right? But we wanted to understand if there's some gap into it. If so, how we know how the report preparers actually perceives the report to be observed, and how the industry is being absorbing it, right? So that's the kind of primary agenda that we thought, which we kind of can bring this as a discussion and help the community members understand more, right? So that's the whole background about it. Perhaps how we can go ahead is, if you and Daniela can give a short introduction about yourselves, what you do in your current roles in Google, and your involvement in preparing this Dora report. Then we can go ahead with the discussion if that works for you, Dave.
Great, absolutely. Well, since I'm talking, I'll go first. I'm Dave Stanke. I'm a developer advocate with Google Cloud. I'm based in Jersey City, New Jersey, and I work with our customers on DevOps and SRE kinds of topics, trying to help Google Cloud customers understand best practices, learn from the community, learn from each other, learn from the research that we do with Dora, and I generally, just help to socialize these ideas. And as part of that work, I do a lot of kind of miscellaneous things around Dora that involve bringing it to various audiences. Daniela.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Daniela. I am a user experience researcher at Google Cloud, and I'm fairly new to DevOps and Dora. I started last year, and essentially my involvement is on the research side of things. So Dave kind of helps evangelize and show the findings into the world. And what we do is kind of try to identify and figure out how to ask questions, so what kind of questions to ask, and kind of help shape the survey, and then analyze the data after. So that's been my role, kind of in the behind the scenes aspect of it, and then help write the report.
Great. Okay, so perhaps let's start with from the basics, right? From your perspective, Dave and Daniela, I'm okay with whoever picks up this question and goes forward. Why do we need these kind of reports in the industry today? Right? What is the importance or significance that these kind of reports provide to the industry today?
Daniela, you want to kick us off?
Yeah. So the question is, what's the importance of the report?
Yeah, in general, it need not be very specific to Dora reports, but there are many industry reports coming in, right? It could be from the cloud, from DevOps, from various other, from digital aspects and all those things. But predominantly, what is the kind of significance that these kind of reports hold today in the industry?
Yeah, I think so. From the beginning, when Dora first started, the idea was to kind of understand where the industry was, kind of what is happening. And how technology helps organizations get better. And from what I understand, there wasn't really a cohesive way of understanding the DevOps, the industry as a whole. Maybe reports here and there, maybe small companies doing their own, but nothing that looked at DevOps in a more broad, large way. So I think that's the beginning of it. And the importance of it, in addition to just providing that framework of understanding the industry as a whole, is to provide not ground truth, because the surveys do not provide ground truth, but it provides a place where we know the data is rigorous, is collected in a way that we can trust it, and we can help point the industry in specific directions and say, this is kind of what the data is showing, this is what we're looking at. And that, in addition to communication with the community and all of that, helps kind of shape and steer the survey. I think I kind of went in all directions there, but.
A lot of good direction, but one of them that I wanted to say, really great points about like rigor and trust, right? The software industry, or perhaps just all of the industries, because everyone is doing software these days, and software is really important to every business these days. But software engineering has been, I think, really mysterious for a long time, even to those of us doing it. How do we measure success? When is it done? We're not answering that question with Dora, but some of these really hard questions, and it's compared to other kinds of work or even other kinds of engineering, it can be really mysterious, especially to those outside of the software engineering teams. And I know I've had plenty of bosses and stakeholders who are trying their best, or maybe even not trying their best, to understand what the heck we do. And I struggle sometimes with grumpiness to say you don't get it. This report really starts from a framework of what the business needs, why software exists. We don't take that for granted, right? And what we do is we position the work inside of that and say, software development is predictive of business success. Software development is here to deliver value to users. And then we go inwards from there to say, well, okay, how do we make that go well? Because that's something that software teams are interested in. It's also something that the people who pay the paychecks to software teams are interested in. And I love that the work allows us to kind of align between those groups on what's the point of us being here and how do we get good at it.
Cool. Just taking from your point, when these kind of industry reports are produced, there is a lot of work that goes in the background, right? A lot of efforts, which might be, which might go unnoticed at some time, right? What kind of efforts do you think, is that goes in, and how does this kind of, how does the team works in getting these kind of reports published?
Yeah, let me give you an overview of the whole kind of the research process, if I may. To answer the question about effort, it takes a village. This is a behemoth of a project. We have a lot of experts, software subject matter experts that we consult with. That's just one aspect. There's a lot of people involved, and it takes about 9 months, almost a year, I would say, from start planning to when the report gets released. And then after that, we go around and do roadshows talking about the results and kind of how that compares to the previous year. But essentially, at the beginning, the planning stages start with a bunch of different areas of what do we know about the previous report? What are some gaps and some things that maybe we didn't get to, or areas that we want to dig deeper? Maybe conversations within the community. The SRE, for example, it's something that component that hasn't been tested before until now, but it's always been this kind of contention. SRE, DevOps, which one? So now you kind of, okay, let's tackle that. Let's ask that question. Documentation. We know documentation is super important, but we hadn't asked that question yet. So there's a balance between, we want to ask the similar questions about, software delivery, performance, lead time, deployment frequency, and all of that. But then we want to expand on what we know. And that involves, again, a bunch of different people and information coming in. And then we sit down, look at the questions, create survey questions, and those get reviewed. And that takes, I don't really think, that takes the longest. Just getting those questions well written so that we get to we ask the right question. We ask the questions in a way that is unbiased. We don't want to bias. We want to be as neutral as possible. And that begins with asking questions in the most neutral possible way. And then after we have the survey, we work with sponsors And the idea is, and this is a very interesting part of the process, and one of the limitations, which is that the survey goes to people who know at least what DevOps is, which means is that people that have never, organizations that have never heard of DevOps are not completing the survey, which means that when we look at our low performers, there's another tier below that we don't even touch. So I think that's like one of the biggest limitations of the survey is that, but we can't teach DevOps when people are completing the survey. So it's a very deliberate decision to kind of not go there and instead of focus on people who at least know what DevOps is. Then in terms of how do we get people to complete the survey, that is, email blasts. Some people do podcasts to say, hey, the survey is out. Social media. We work with sponsors, and they one of the things that they do is that they send out the survey to their connections, their network. So that's how we're getting. So it's a snowball effect, but it also means that it's people know people know people know people, and that's how we get people completing the survey. And it helps, when we have someone that's an industry leader say, hey, take the survey, that has value. So that helps kind of spread the survey in the most global way possible, knowing that we're gonna miss certain spots. We collect data for about a month or so. Then we close the survey. We analyze the data. There's already a pipeline that's built for that. Review the results, and then we start writing. Decide kind of what areas we want to focus on, what are the interesting findings, and then reports written, and then we release it after it's reviewed and all of those things. And then we go on the roadshow and talk about it, rinse and repeat. So hopefully that gave you a good overview of all the things involved.
Yeah, that actually describes now what kind of efforts it goes, and it's not small, right? It's going to be humongous, and that leads to two questions. For me, we all know that Dora was an independent agency before Google took over, right? It was an independent entity publishing the reports. How much of it was a challenge for Google to inherit the kind of process that Dora did earlier, and getting it acclimatized to the Google way of doing the research, right? And my second is, this perhaps is like a year-round job, right? Doing this complete research, doing the surveys, collecting the details, writing it, publishing it, and then marketing it to the public and all those things. What would be the when we talk about a company like Google, right? That should be a return on investment, right? What would be the return on investment for these kind of reports?
So I can cover that first one maybe because I was at Google as a fan of Dora, and then saw Dora come in, got very excited about that, and feel sort of privileged to be able to work with something that I was really respectful of. I would say to your question, like, what's it like bringing something like that into a big established company? And I think of course there's going to be noise. Noise is great. Change is good. I would say it's really been very smooth in a lot of ways because Google by nature is culturally, we're very much a kind of a hive of independent entities. We have a lot of like startup kind of mindset. Even if we are giant and have plenty of systems and bureaucracy, we still believe a lot in, I think, autonomy. And perhaps even more to the point, from the beginning and still today, Google has a very academic sort of mindset. You'll see the way we do product development is often framed as experiments, and we'll even do things where there's like basic research where we don't know where it's going to go in terms of a product. And we're fortunate that we have the scale and the resources to do that. And so it was pretty natural, I think, for Googlers to appreciate that this is a research entity. And I mean, heck, look, all of us wish we could go back into the 60s and work at Xerox PARC, right? And this is the same kind of thing. We got this cool science bureau inside our for-profit company, and we love to learn from them, and then look at ways of when the science comes out, how do we incorporate that into the products. And we've had good partnerships there where the team is great about helping communicate it to us in ways that can be absorbed by our customers. And that's part of what I do, right? Take the science, dumb it down, and bring it out to our customers.
Got it. Any comments on the return on investment, Dave? Is that something that would work with the?
I'm missing that word. Any comments on the which?
The return on the investment, right? So Google as such invests in doing these kind of researches, right? Does that expect some kind of returns back from the industry community that Google works on?
I will say I would plead ignorance and say that it's above my pay grade to decide how much to fund it and how much how we expect a return from it. I know that in my mind there's a ton of value to Google, to our customers, to myself. Making that judgment, I'm glad that they did.
Got it. Yep. Okay, probably slightly deviating from the points that you shared, right? Probably this question is more to Daniel. Daniel, Dave was mentioning that you work more on the cultural aspects of the reports, right? So I mean, culture, in my opinion, has always been a kind of an unsung hero, or something that has been for to a certain extent to be neglected as well, right? How do you bring in from your experience, how do you bring in the cultural aspect in these kind of reports?
So the culture is super interesting, right? And DevOps is about people when you kind of distill everything away from it. And culture is many things. So I think the biggest challenge is that culture is a multifaceted concept and is composed of many things. So you can't just really ask people, do you like your culture at work? Or do you like your team's culture? What does even culture mean? What does team mean, for that matter? So I think there's a number of ways in which we've decided to tackle this. And the first one is looking at the Western culture, which is kind of a theoretical approach from research from academia, just saying, hey, these are 3 types of cultures. And we know that one of them seems better than the other ones. Information flows, people are not, you don't shoot the messenger, you share information. That's one aspect. Then within Google was this movement research around psychological safety. And kind of what does that mean? And essentially for us, it means that I can dissent, I can disagree, and I know I'm not gonna get fired. I know that I can have a crazy idea and I can say it without feeling like my job is gonna be, hindered, or I'm gonna have any kind of consequence. So that ability to kind of bring your ideas to the table is a big part of psychological safety. Then you have something that we hadn't measured before, which is belonging and inclusion. You can argue that the way people feel, how do they feel with their teammates, how do they feel about their organization as a whole, has a huge impact on their performance, on their desire to stay within that place, all kinds of other things. So we decided to add a couple, 2 sections, one on belonging and one on inclusion, to see if these factors also impact the culture. So my point here is that because culture is so big, nebulous concept, we can take some liberties with it and start adding things. Maybe next year we'll look at, I don't know, because I can't think of it right now, but maybe some other aspect about culture, or about belonging, or maybe something about team dynamics. Team dynamics are also part of culture. So we can kind of play around with this concept. It's so just ginormous. I mean, we could have an entire DevOps on just culture. So hopefully that kind of answers your question.
Yeah.
It does.
Point out that that's a technical scientific term, ginormous. But yes, culture is ginormous.
Cool. Okay. So I know at this moment I just wanted to move the needle towards how these reports are being consumed, especially in the Dora reports are being consumed in the market, right? When you sit in the boardroom, not design the report on an under a different approach on how do you collect the reports and all data and all those things, you would go with some kind of perception, right? Okay, looking into these kind of factors will create this kind of inputs or these kind of impacts in the market, right? But there could be some gap. So from your perspective, I just wanted to understand, right, how does the market or the industry leaders consume these kind of reports today, and is there any gap that you feel that okay, these kind of these points are being overlooked or neglected by the industry?
I can start.
Yeah.
So certainly, I feel like there's probably a lot of people who could benefit from reading the report and understanding the research who aren't yet. But change is slow, and it changes slow within a company. Change is really slow across a whole industry or range of industries. There's a lot of organizations. Or let me put it this way. There's this article 10 plus years ago from Mark Andreessen, software is eating the world, right? Every company is a software company. Well, that was a brand new and controversial idea at the time, and still isn't, necessarily truth or broadly accepted. I think bit by bit and with a big lurch because of COVID, companies are realizing that software is essential to their business. And then they have to start asking, okay, how do we do that? And but they may not know about us yet, and these things take time. And it, as an academic work, it's not something where we're going to take out a Super Bowl ad. So there's an organic aspect to it. Certainly, though, it's spreading broadly, and I think it's spreading quickly. And we actually in 2019, the research, we looked at sort of awareness, and we declared that DevOps had crossed the chasm, and certainly along the heels of DevOps as a term and an idea, this particular body of work and Dora as really a standard for integrity within the work has really gone far and wide. I think in terms of how the work is consumed, it certainly there's a lot of need for it, in the sense of, as we've talked about somewhat, like, is my investment working? How do I get good at software? Because I know I need to get good at software. So step one is that recognition that software matters. Step two is saying, okay, how do I make it good for me? And one of the things that I think has been a challenge for a long time is that, like, we really care about our business metrics. We care about our profitability and our market share and things like that. And software's relationship to that has been known, but kind of abstract. With the work and with the 4 key metrics, right? There's 4 golden metrics of software delivery, 2 for speed, 2 for stability. I see those as leading indicators of the value that your software team is going to deliver to the company. And therefore, when we get the ear of the people who do write the checks, they're very interested in being able to say, yeah, I want my teams to really achieve at that level. That said, culture is hard. And another thing that we are asking people, especially in leadership positions, is to look at a different kind of leadership and a different kind of culture than they may be used to. And so that can take time. So a lot of times the way this knowledge gets brought into an organization is through individuals, as it always will be. There's really a very sort of like almost religious aspect to it, of people getting inspired and then bringing it along. So we see people have some success at one organization, get a new opportunity somewhere else, and then bring the Dora research and the DevOps practices into that next one, and it just keeps growing organically from there.
Yeah, and I think there's the goal of the report is to provide this industry standard about what we know works. It's a long report. People might not have time to read it. So that's like one aspect of how, like, the information is out there. How is it being read? Who's reading it? And then what is happening after? Because just because the report exists doesn't mean that it's driving change. The report is not driving change. People are driving change. And that, like Dave said, takes a lot of time. And we usually see when leadership is resistant, then it doesn't matter what happens at the bottom. They're going to hit eventually a block, and things are going to only move so much. So I think for this work to really make it into organizations, the buy-in has to be from the top and from the bottom, and they have to work together. And I think they have to understand that you can't change all the things at once. That is one of the things that we emphasize. If you try to do everything that's in the report, it's just not going to work. But if you kind of choose one thing and focus on that and really try to see how to improve that one thing, then it becomes almost like a domino effect, and you start to see the benefits. And then I think that's how the culture changes. That's how you actually see companies truly consuming, because now they're consuming in a way that they're using, not just reading it and kind of, oh yeah, that's cool, but how does that relate to me?
Great point about change and creating that virtuous cycle. One thing that I see is kind of an anti-pattern sometimes is people will consume this information as kind of like a checklist. They'll say, okay, there's 30 something capabilities and I'm going to check them all off and then I'm done with the DevOps. And I totally sympathize with that. I love checklists, but it doesn't work that way. And what we really want people to understand is that the focus should be on the vectors. It's on the improvements that you make, anchoring on measuring what matters and improving those things. And all of those capabilities are a means to that end. So sort of the first and most important thing, it's almost like, well, similar to how culture is the most important thing, though it's something that you can't necessarily do directly. When you're working with the report, it's like mindset about how you do this is the most important thing. But of course, the way you achieve that is by getting into those details and finding, today's bottleneck and working through it.
Great. I think you kind of addressed my next question as well, David, to a certain extent, right? But nevertheless, if I can put it again, if you have to define in just 2 or 3 words, how do you see this report? Either it's a book of rules or a framework that organizations can adopt to, or it's just a guidance / good to know for organizations?
Definitely a book of rules, and you read it once and you're done. You're DevOps. Yeah, it's part of the whole thing that what makes DevOps wonderful and also infuriating sometimes is that it is very fluid, it is very flexible. You're never going to be done, and the spirit of continuous improvement is essential to the work itself. And that's one of the reasons why we do reports on an ongoing basis. Things change, we learn new things, and this is a great opportunity for me to plug the fact that Daniela mentioned some of the deep dives we did this year on things like SRE, documentation, culture. Every report has different deep dives in different articles. So there's really great stuff in previous reports, even if you've totally ingested the most recent. So I recommend that. But I think it's very much framework oriented or even just mindset oriented to say, Daniela was saying, like, we wanted to create something that says, we understand what the best practices are in general. We understand how to measure our success at Dev. Both of those are relatively new ideas, at least with any kind of rigor around it. And so we're coming out and asserting that. And then how do you get there? That is very much going to vary company by company, team by team, month by month. And it's a matter of, really aligning and continuously communicating to align on what are the goals and how do we, find success? How do we develop a culture of learning? And then trying some stuff. We have some suggestions what might be worth trying, but every organization is going to have to do their own process of experimentation.
I get your point there, but no, just kind of circling back to the point Daniela mentioned in terms of how do you go with the research, right? You just mentioned every organization has its own culture, their own transformation journey. It is not common across, it could be unique, right? But when you do a data collection, it can there would be multiple factors that would impact or that has the kind of variance in the way the surveys are being done, right? So how do you take into account those variable factors, right? You could have some, let's say, for an example, as a minimal number of 10 samples that you're collecting, right? Just for the sake of this discussion, I'm not saying that that's the actual number, right? But let's say if you're getting samples from 10 different members, they would have their own variable factors, right? How do you carefully negate those variable factors and bring in a broader perspective to the market?
Yeah, I think from if I understand your question correctly, it's like how do we make sure that the data that we collect is, trustworthy, and what happens when we have data from all these different people saying different things? How do we kind of make sense of it? And one way in which we do that is that when we ask questions, we don't ask one question. We ask many questions. So for example, our section on documentation is 3 blocks, and it has it has questions about best practices in terms of documentation. It has questions about, what documents you have access to, and a bunch of other things. So essentially, by having a large number of questions that are tackling one specific concept, you're able to create a composite score, essentially, and just kind of average all those questions together. And that's one of the ways in which we kind of deal with all that extra noise. Because you're right, this is it's a survey, it's self-report. People have their own biases, their own beliefs, even the way they understand the question. As best as we write it, they might understand the question a different way. But it is the best tool we have. So for example, one argument could be, couldn't we just look at logs data or just like actual behavioral data and see what the systems are doing? Let's just look at the systems. They're not biased, but they're limited, right? Like a system has boundaries in a way that a person might not. You might be able to see documentation in a specific aspect of a company, but a person might have a broader kind of understanding of that. You can't really ask a system about culture. And if we're collecting data from around the world, every company may have a different way of collecting this, logs data, this system data. So how do then you create one database that has all of this data and they all mean the same thing? So I think when we look at the alternatives, the survey is the best we have. We can't really run experiments and that would be amazing, right? If you had a company that decided we're going to do DevOps here and we're not going to do DevOps here, and we're going to pin these two together and see what happens. That will be one way, but that will also be a very small sample, and it will only tell us about what's happening in that specific company. For that to work, you would have to do it in a much more larger scale, and the amount of coordination and money that it would take, it would just be unfeasible. But you do it right. You're right that there's some limitations, and we've worked really hard to mitigate those without ignoring them.
Got it. Yeah.
Excuse me for a sec. Do you ever use the metrics from support calls from the users of the products that are being built?
Say that one more time.
Using the metrics from the number of support calls to have the end user, shall we say, someone, another development team, someone in HR, someone throughout the organization, use the metrics based on the number of phone calls and the amount of time to get from a support perspective, to get them actually up and running.
We don't. And so the data is completely anonymized. So we have no idea where these people are coming, like where they work and where they work, what company, what those specifics, who they are. We don't have that, and that is on purpose. We want people to feel comfortable really telling us how they feel, what they think. And the moment you attach a name to that, people just don't want to tell you the truth. So that's why we've separated those things and just anonymized everything about the survey.
Cool. Okay. So slightly moving ahead, right? In 2020 report, Dora included actually 2 additional topics. One was on SRE, which is kind of a technical evolution that was happening in the market. Then impact of this COVID, which actually had an impact across the globe. how do you see these reports evolving in future? These kind of, is Dora going to add few other areas as well as you get to 2022 and beyond?
I think we look at what's happening in the community. We see what trends, what things are important, what people are talking about, so I think that link between Dora and the world and what's happening and understanding and being in sync and not losing that connection is fundamental to the work. The community knows best. The moment we close that door and don't have that communication, we will lose touch and the report will lose its value. So I think the report and the survey evolves with the community. So we kind of get that feedback. And that's why it's so important for people to complete the survey. The more people that do the survey, the better, because the more data points we have, we might be missing patterns or things if people don't do the survey. So the community engagement is absolutely fundamental to the life of the report. So I think that's, in my eyes, that's how I see the report evolving. Dave, do you have any thoughts on this?
Mostly just, +1. I mean, I think the history of the report has done a great job of keeping an eye on the trends like you're talking about. What's the pulse of the technology community? We update the core data every time, but we also then explore new things. I was particularly impressed with the way we were able to study COVID in a very sort of timely way and came out with some very interesting findings, including one of my favorites, which is that teams that had a generative culture were able to perform better and reduce things like burnout during COVID. So it makes me, my takeaway from that is that culture is something like an insurance factor almost. We don't know what the next problem is going to be. We don't know what the next global crisis is going to be, but there's always going to be something. That's something we say in SRE. There will always be incidents, but we can prepare for it in the abstract by developing that generative, trusting culture.
Yeah, I think kind of to follow up on that, the way we worked has changed. We're not gonna go back to how things were before March 2020. So understanding how this hybrid or how working from home impacts burnout, we wouldn't know that before asking these questions about COVID, but that answer is relevant now moving forward because we're not going back to the office the way we did before. So how do we address that, and how do we, make shifts in culture or how people feel? How do we ensure that people feel good about what they're doing so that burnout doesn't become a problem?
Really important lesson for leadership. When something like this happens, of course, the first instinct is, how do we make sure the lights stay on? How do we make sure the generators keep running? How can we get people connected to their VPNs so they can keep working? All that obviously is essential to running the business. But day two, our question has to be, how do we keep our human culture running? How do we create that sense of community, trust, and inclusion when people don't have a water cooler to gather around and get to know each other? And one of the things that's a continuous finding in the Dora research is that sense of community and trust is essential to the quality of the software itself.
Cool. I think I am done with all the questions that I had. Probably I would give an opportunity to others. Garima, if you have any questions, please go ahead. And before Garima goes ahead, people in the audience, if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand or type in your questions on the chat, and we can get that addressed. Over to you, Garima. Yeah.
Excellent. And I think the purpose of this discussion today was to actually cover 3 questions, basically how these reports are produced, how they're consumed, what is that value to the ecosystem which we see from these reports. The reason why this is timely, because we see a lot of reports and surveys coming in, and from a community perspective, we are more interested to see how we could contribute in this. So if, let's say, Dave and Daniela, you can talk a little bit more about like communities like us, which are like homegrown communities. We have many chapters here in Canada. We want to participate and contribute to this. So one way you mentioned that we should add in our inputs to the survey, but are there any other ways to contribute?
Well, I'll say that having a community of practice is something that we have actually studied directly through our research, and so this is really great that you're gathering people, sharing experiences, sharing things that worked, sharing things that didn't. In terms of being part of this movement and spreading the word, absolutely take the survey, share the survey, get your leaders to pay attention. And I think that's one of the biggest things that this community can do is and I'm gonna, there's a few points that I may be tiresome about, but one of them is like, we can measure this stuff. That's kind of a surprise. And anyone who's been, like a technology leader for 30 years has been through the ringer of trying to measure software, trying to have, the reason Agile exists is because we're terrible at predicting deadlines. A lot of this stuff we found that the kind of ways that we might impose rigor in other disciplines don't work for us for whatever reason. I have some hypotheses, but the point is we actually now have, through this work, developed a really rigorous way to measure and improve software development, and letting those stakeholders know that such a thing exists and that it actually is good for us as practitioners and is good for them as our stakeholders. I think that's a really valuable thing. So, again, I think of this as a philosophical revolution, and so we are all part of that movement and spreading the word. In our community, we may have been knowing about this stuff and thinking about it for a long time, but I work with a lot of customers, and these are customers who are coming to a cloud to buy cloud computing, but they haven't necessarily heard about this, and so there's still a huge opportunity to evangelize.
Thank you, Dave. And we also have some more people here who specifically are writing these surveys, and this is the reason why we invited them. Mofuzir, I see you also in here. Do you have a question?
Yes. Hey, Dave. So who are the folks that really got benefited from the Dora, or the enterprises that really excelled with the Dora report?
Well, there's some great case studies, and in fact, I'm going to say that you should check out something that is not released yet. But we at Google are doing a project called the Devops Awards, where a number of organizations that have benefited from embracing DevOps practices are we're going to be publishing their success stories. And I believe, Daniela, I don't know if you know the dates on this. I think it's like today almost. It's like right now that we're putting that out there. But certainly, there are some great case studies out there that you can find about organizations transforming through DevOps. And some of them are very well known, things like Capital One or Target. Some of them are newer case studies that we're kind of just getting started with, and that you'll hear about in the Devops Awards. I don't know if I am restricted in a lot of ways about things that I can mention, because the folks that I know of are our customers and they haven't approved me to talk about them. But I can say that this stuff works.
So Dave, I know there are a lot of good case studies. They're actually across the street from my headquarters, Capital One.
Oh, nice.
And I would say that there's a lot of folks that we collaborate there as well. So
can you just feel the trust coming off across the street? You can feel the productivity and trust, psychological safety.
You got it. I would say one thing that in the past, so I come from SAP background, and I always hear that we can do DevOps for SAP, and we're proving that wrong. We're deploying every couple of minutes, for our newer system, the newer one. Even when the legacy, right? We're releasing almost every day.
Well, excellent, and that is a great message about DevOps, and you'll see this in the work itself. Is that any organization can improve our 4 key metrics we've found to be reliable indicators of predictive of business value across any industry, any kind of software. So, you know, there are some kinds of organizations, a scrappy startup in a garage that might say once a day, that's super slow. But most larger organizations are going to be like, you know, blown away by how you're deploying that fast. And you're proof that wherever speed you're at, you can go faster. Daniel, do you have any thoughts about kind of applicability of this work to different kinds of organizations?
No, just second what you said. It's kind of amazing, actually, that we see a consistency in predictability across types of industry. It's not that, oh, well, tech industries really see the benefit, but manufacturing doesn't, or something else, retail doesn't. Everyone benefits, which is kind of an outstanding kind of realization.
Yeah. Excellent, Dave. Thank you, Daniela.
Thank you. And we also have, I think, Chitrita, if I'm pronouncing her name right. Do you have any questions to Dave and Daniela?
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Chitrita, Daniela, Dave. It was lovely hearing from you both. I'm at the moment working with Garima to get a survey run for the CDF community. So I had one small question around the community of practice. So when you talk about the community, you know, how can we make these surveys more inclusive, that, you know, that it reaches out to all the various stakeholders within this community of practice, and based on all the surveys and the reports that you've looked at, I mean, what are those marginalized stakeholders from where you do not get a lot of inputs into the surveys? How can we outreach those? How can we move to those areas and, you know, look out for answers from them?
That's such a good question, and I don't have a good answer. But I mean, one key example is that there's barely any women completing the survey, because there's not that many women developers, right? So some of these questions just highlight discrepancies within the industry itself, and that is itself a problem. I think my answer to you is, unfortunately, a boots in the ground kind of approach. Like, you have to go to those places, see who may not know, what kinds of organizations. I mean, like I mentioned, we don't measure people who don't know about DevOps. So that right there and then, I would argue, is a vulnerable population in its own way. But I think evangelizing and having these kinds of conversations, having you know, leading experts talk about the importance of it, and really emphasizing how it's like anything, right? Your opinion matters. We want to hear from you. When people feel heard and seen, that goes a long way. And the only way that happens is by face-to-face, you know, engagement.
So have there been any examples, Daniela, that has really helped you with a larger outreach with these surveys, you know? Are there sessions that you kind of direct towards, say, you know, women technologists, or, you know, you do outreach with the legal teams also, you know, software legal, any example that you can throw our way?
No, I don't. It's, again, a very good question. I don't have current insight into the specific email list and how we're reaching those populations. I don't know if we're making, I mean, to be honest, I don't know if we're making a concernable effort to, like you said, go and specifically get at, you know, women in technology and these specific outlets. I can't answer that, but something to consider for sure.
Sure. Okay. Thank you, Daniela.
This is actually a really good question, and this is also a good question from a community perspective. It's not only reports; it's also, how do you increase participation in the community? So one thing which we have done is we have created license chapters, because sometimes what we see is that licensing with these marginalized communities, and the way we see participation in the community of practice. This is one way to address this and kind of bring that change. But yeah, I think I agree with Daniela that there is more work to be done, and we are continuously learning as we go along. I see Jose has a question. I see you on video.
Yes. How are you? Thank you, Daniela and Dave, for sharing those really important insights. One question, I see that there is very little participation from Central America, Caribbean, and South America. And I don't know if you are thinking in a way to get more organic participation for the next Dora reports. I know that in those regions, there is a lot of Devops work and adoption across them, but I don't know why. I am a community evangelist. I lead to community here in South America, but I don't know why the people is not tending to participate in this kind of important reports for them, for the organization, because with that they are more aware of what they are going to achieve with monitoring these important metrics. So what are you thinking about the participation in these regions?
No, I really love these questions, because they're like just getting right at one thing that we're not doing that well. So I really appreciate that call out. I think one aspect is that we don't translate the survey. So that by itself limits who can take the survey. You have to, know English well enough to answer the questions. So that is something that it will increase the effort significantly to have the survey translated. However, I can see the value in doing that, and I know, and Dave, I think there are more initiatives in South America. I know there's like one in Brazil, and there's certain other initiatives that are happening to kind of bring DevOps into those areas.
Okay. There's a lot of DevOps community and activity in Brazil is a particular hotspot, but all of Latin America. And just I know within my team, we're expanding our advocacy into Latin America, but it has absolutely been underserved to this point. And you're right, we need to work on that. There's so many, I can just speak to Daniela's point about we're not where we want to be. The ratio of developer advocates we have in different areas versus the number of developers in those areas, it should be equal, but it's not. And it's something we want to work on. And please, help us spread the word about Dora, but also help us, keep us accountable. We're not doing enough in your area. You're right.
Well, any help that you need, I'm here to help.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Cool. I think we are just about time. So any further questions from the audience? One last opportunity to ask questions directly to Dave and Daniela.
I can go, Mahfouzur.
Yeah, probably we can have one last year.
Sure, yeah. Just a thought, and it may be a little spin-off from what we're discussing today. I mean, who are the movers and shakers in DevOps? I mean, we do have some very new organizations. The principles of having DevOps is very old. It's from the 1980s, but who are the movers and shakers, who guide the trends in DevOps, specifically data ops, if you can speak to?
I do not have a lot of context on data ops, I'm afraid. What I would probably do is cheat and go look on Twitter and find someone who's a data ops type person and find their communities. I don't I'll be honest, I don't know if there are like data ops conferences yet. It's a topic that comes up somewhat at DevOps days where, I'm at a lot of them. Daniela, have we studied data ops yet? Yet, you hear me say?
Yeah, I don't think so.
Guys, if you're looking for your first conference for DataOps, we have one here in Canada, June 28th, DataOps Summit Canada. I personally invite both of you to join that conference. And this is the reason I think we are starting these conversations, that many of these terms are just kind of mushrooming from the bottom, and we need to converge. We need to kind of set the perspective, and we don't have to struggle all the way that the way DevOps did, right? So I think we have key learnings to share. So I believe that Dave and Daniela, you would be a great contribution to the summit. And hopefully, we can move the needle, broaden the conversation from DevOps to DataOps, how we can go with that.
It's a great point about, sharing these ideas. One of the things that we've observed is that some of this stuff has evolved independently and often finds a convergent finding, right? SRE evolved independently of DevOps, and there's a ton of similarity. And the psychological safety research and so many of these things end up kind of finding the same sort of truths underneath. And the more we can abstract out those things that are going to be common across all these different endeavors, the more we can bring what we've learned about DevOps to data ops, or who knows, maybe even to completely unrelated fields as far as we can tell. For example, the culture work that Daniela mentioned about that Ron Westrom did had nothing to do with software. It was being done in things like hospitals and air traffic control, places where outcomes are pretty important. And what we did is we then applied that to software and found that it works for software as well.
Cool. I think we are about that time to close. So just any final points from Dave and Daniela from you again to conclude?
No, thank you so much for having us. This was super fun.
Thanks so much for having us. Check out g.co/DevOps for lots more information, resources. You'll find links to the report. You'll find an interactive capabilities diagram, and you'll find information about how to put this stuff into practice in your tools and in your organizations.
Great. And to Dave and Daniel, thank you so much for accepting our invite and agreeing to for this conversation. It was really insightful, right? As I said, these are some things that the community members may not be knowing. It should be something that I thought knowing these things would help them to appreciate the reports better and imply them into their day-to-day work. Thank you so much again for agreeing for this discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.